The flashing lights of the patrol car in the rearview mirror made Marcus Thompson sigh tiredly. He'd been driving on Maple Avenue for 20 years, and this peaceful, maple-lined street in the Boston suburbs had never made him feel unsafe until tonight. The shrill siren rang out in the cold November air. Marcus slowly pulled the car over. His heart beat faster when he saw the young police officer step out of the patrol car, his hand already on the butt of the gun. Vehicle documents and driver's license. The police officer's cold voice echoed through Marcus's lowered window. The smell of coffee and cigarettes wafted by as he leaned over to look inside the car. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat dry. 23 years of service in the industry, currently serving as Chief of Internal Affairs Inspector of the Boston Police Department. Yet he still had to go through this situation. "Officer, may I know the reason for the traffic stop?" "You ran the red light at the intersection ahead," the policeman said, his voice gruff. Marcus knew that wasn't true. He always followed traffic rules carefully, especially when driving home late. "Papers, now." The flashlight shined directly into Marcus's face, causing him to squint. The familiar smell of leather from the official wallet wafted as he slowly pulled it out. His heart beat so loudly that it could be heard in the quiet space of the car. "Officer, I'll get the papers from my wallet." "Slow down!" The policeman's voice became more tense. "Let me see your hand, clearly." Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. 23 years of experience have taught him that anger only makes a situation worse. He slowly opened his wallet, letting the flashlight clearly illuminate his police identification card. The young police officer blinked in surprise, his flashlight shaking slightly. "Sir, sir," his voice changed completely. "I didn't know you were—" "Sergeant Wilson," Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "You have sworn an oath to protect and serve all citizens, regardless of skin color or social status. I would like to see you in my office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. The night air was bitterly cold, but Marcus felt beads of sweat running down his spine. He doesn't like using his power, but sometimes it's necessary. Not for himself, but for others, those who don't have a special ID card to protect them. On the drive home, Marcus couldn't help but think about his son. Thomas is just 16 years old, about to start learning to drive. How to teach boys about this harsh reality? How can we explain that the color of our skin can make something as simple as driving dangerous? The aroma of grilled chicken and mashed potatoes wafted from the kitchen as Marcus entered the house. Sarah, his wife, was standing by the kitchen, her shiny black hair tied back neatly. She turned around when she heard the door open. The warm smile on her lips quickly disappeared when she saw her husband's expression. "Another difficult day, huh?" Sarah asked softly, walking next to him. Marcus hugged his wife, inhaling the familiar scent of the lavender shampoo she always used. "You know," he whispered. "Sometimes I wonder if we're making progress, or if things are still the same as they were 20 years ago." Sarah caressed her husband's back, her soft fingers soothing the tension in his muscles. "You've done a lot of good things, Marcus. You're changing things, one day at a time." From the next room came the sound of Thomas playing the piano. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, a sad but beautiful melody blending with the quiet atmosphere of the evening. Marcus closed his eyes, letting the music and the warmth of his family soothe his troubled soul. "You'll see Sergeant Wilson tomorrow," Marcus said after a moment of silence. "I don't want to ruin a young officer's career, but I also can't let behavior like this continue." Sarah nodded in understanding. "You will know what to do. You always know how to balance justice and compassion." Marcus looked through the window, where the last bright red maple leaves of autumn were dancing in the wind. He thought about the future, not just of his son, but of all the children of color growing up in this city. They deserve to live in a better world, a world where they don't have to be afraid when they see police car lights in their rearview mirror. That night, as he lay in bed, Marcus listened to the wind blowing through the trees outside his window. The steady sound is like the whispers of the souls who have gone before, those who fought for justice and equality. He told himself that tomorrow would be an opportunity, not to punish, but to educate, to make a change, no matter how small. The sound of the clock striking 12 at night echoed from the living room below. Marcus closed his eyes, letting thoughts of justice, responsibility, and hope carry him to sleep. Tomorrow is a new day, and with each new day comes an opportunity to make the world a little better. In the darkness of the room, Marcus could feel Sarah's steady breathing next to him, hear the sparse sound of traffic on the street, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of police sirens sounded like a reminder of unfinished work. But tonight, for the first time in many years, he did not feel tired by the burden of responsibility. Instead, he felt an extraordinary peace, the peace of someone who knows he is on the right track, no matter how difficult the path. Marcus's office was on the third floor of the Boston Police Department building, a large room with windows overlooking Boston Common. The morning rays of sunlight shine through the door, creating long streaks of light on the navy blue carpet. Marcus stood by the window holding a steaming cup of black coffee, looking down at the people rushing on the street. The wall clock showed 8:45 a.m. The knock on the door rang just as the clock hands pointed to 9 o'clock. Marcus smiled. At least Sergeant Wilson was on time. "Come in," he said, his voice calm. Wilson walked in, still wearing his police uniform, but without the arrogance of last night. His face was tense, small drops of sweat glistening on his forehead under the office lights. "Sit down, Sergeant." Marcus gestured towards the chair across from his desk. The smell of leather from the classic chairs blends with the scent of coffee, creating the familiar atmosphere of a normal morning in the office. But both of them knew this was no ordinary morning. Wilson sat down, his back straight, as if in a disciplinary hearing. Marcus studied him for a moment before speaking. "How old are you, Sergeant Wilson?" 28 years old, sir." "And how long have you been in the force?" 4 years, sir." Marcus nodded, placing the cup of coffee on the table. The sound of porcelain hitting wood echoed in the silent space of the office. 4 years. You know, when I was just 4 years into the industry, I encountered a similar situation as you did last night. Wilson looked up, his eyes mixed with curiosity and concern. "In 1999, I was a young, enthusiastic patrol police officer, confident that I was doing the right thing. One night, I stopped a middle-aged white man because I suspected he was driving drunk. He seemed upset, refused to show his documents, and started shouting at me." Marcus stood up and walked to the window. Car horns and people talking from the street below echoed like background music to his story. "I was so angry. I thought, hey, I'm a cop. He has to respect me. I was about to drag him out of the car and handcuff him. But then I saw a photo on the dashboard of his car. A family photo with 3 young children. And I suddenly realized I was react to what? With disrespect or with your own prejudices?" Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The sound of leather seats rubbing creates an unpleasant sound in the quiet space. "Finally," Marcus continued, "I tested his alcohol level. He was completely sober. He was a doctor on night duty at the hospital, tired after a 12-hour operation. I apologized and let him go. The next week, I saw him again at the emergency room. He was the one who saved my daughter's life after a bicycle accident. Marcus turned to look at Wilson, his eyes serious but not angry. Life has its own way of teaching us lessons, Sergeant, sometimes through simple situations, sometimes through tragedies. The question is, are we willing to learn? Wilson swallowed hard, his throat dry. Sir, about last night, I didn't mean... Prejudice is the most dangerous thing in our work, Sergeant, Marcus interrupted. It creeps into our decisions without us even realizing it. It makes us see threats where there are none. And sometimes, it can make us lose ourselves. Marcus opened the desk drawer and took out a file, the sound of paper rustling in the tense atmosphere. I've looked over your record. You're a good officer, Wilson. Your record is impressive. But last night, you let your prejudices dictate your actions. Yes, sir, Wilson admitted, his voice hoarse. I'm sorry. Apologizing is the first step, Marcus said. But more important is learning and changing. I want you to participate in a special training program on cultural awareness and social justice. 6 weeks, 2 sessions a week. Not as a punishment, but as an opportunity to develop. Wilson raised his head, his eyes surprised. Aren't you going to suspend me? Marcus smiled slightly. What will suspending you solve? We need good officers who are willing to admit their mistakes and learn from them. I believe you can be one of them. Through the window, the morning sunlight became brighter, illuminating the whole room. From Boston Common came the laughter of children playing, children of all skin colors, without distinction, without prejudice. One more thing, Marcus said as Wilson stood up to leave. Next week, I will organize a barbecue at home. My family and some colleagues will be present. I would like to invite you to attend. Wilson stopped, surprised by the unexpected invitation. Sir? Sometimes, Marcus said softly, the best way to break stereotypes is to sit down and share a meal together. My wife cooks delicious grilled chicken. When Wilson left, his shoulders were no longer as tense as when he arrived. Marcus watched him through the frosted glass door of his office, hoping that today's conversation would make a difference. Not big, groundbreaking changes, but small changes, day by day, like drops of water patiently creeping through hard rock. He returned to his desk, picked up the phone and called Sarah. The bell rang a few times before his wife picked up the phone. Honey, he said, next week we're having another guest for the barbecue. The smell of smoke from the charcoal grill mixed with the aroma of meat and spices spread throughout Thompson's backyard. Gentle jazz music resounded from the speakers placed on the porch, mixed with the chatter and laughter of the guests. Sarah was busy arranging salads and sandwiches in the kitchen, while Marcus stood by the oven, focusing on the slowly cooking meat. Thomas, Marcus's son, sat on the steps behind the house, holding a guitar, his fingers gently plucking the blues notes. The boy occasionally glanced at the gate, as if waiting for someone. Marcus knew his son was curious about the special guest he had been talking about all week. Dad, Thomas said, his voice thoughtful. I still don't understand why you invited the person who stopped your car that day. Marcus flipped a piece of meat, letting perfect grill marks appear on the surface. Sometimes, he says, the best way to remove walls is to invite people through your door. The doorbell rang at that moment. Sarah opened the door, and Wilson stood there, clutching a bottle of wine, wearing a polo shirt and jeans instead of his usual uniform. He looked much younger and more approachable than he did that day in Marcus's office. Welcome to our home, Sarah smiled warmly. "I'm Sarah, Marcus's wife." "Thanks for inviting me," Wilson said, sounding a little sheepish. I brought a bottle of wine." "Oh, Cabernet Sauvignon." Sarah took the bottle. "This is Marcus's favorite, too. You have a good eye." Wilson walked into the backyard, where the atmosphere had become livelier with the presence of about a dozen other guests, Marcus's co-workers and their families. He stopped for a moment when he recognized a few familiar faces from the police department, but no one seemed annoyed or surprised by his presence. "Wilson!" Marcus waved from the oven. "Come here. I need an expert on meat doneness." When Wilson approached, Marcus handed him a cold bottle of beer. Droplets of water on the bottle glistened in the late afternoon sunlight of autumn. "Do you like your meat well done or medium well?" "Medium," Wilson replied, seeming less nervous. "Great," Marcus smiled. "Me too. Sarah likes it well done, but I always think that's a waste of a good piece of meat." They stood there, side by side in comfortable silence, watching the children, their colleagues' children, run and chase each other in the yard. Thomas was still sitting on the steps, but now began to play a more cheerful tune. "The boy's a really good guitar player," Wilson commented. "Yes," Marcus nodded proudly. "He started learning when he was 8 years old. Music is a magical language. It doesn't care about skin color or social status." Wilson was silent for a moment, then whispered, "You know, I started the course you recommended." "And?" "It was different from what I imagined. Last week we had a session with a group of teenagers from Dorchester. We talked about their experiences with the police. I didn't expect. I wonder if they have the same dreams, fears, and hopes as anyone else," Marcus continued. Wilson nodded, his eyes turned to Thomas. "I've been thinking about that night a lot. If that was your son—" "But it's not," Marcus interrupted, "and that's what matters, because every single one of us who stopped that night was someone's son, someone's brother, someone's father." The aroma of grilled meat filled the air, and Sarah began to bring dishes to the table. Laughter, the sound of knives and forks clashing, and music blend together to create the cozy atmosphere of a perfect late autumn afternoon. Thomas finally left the guitar and joined the meal. The boy sat across from Wilson, and after a few minutes of hesitation, they began to talk about music. It turned out that Wilson also knew how to play bass guitar, and their conversation quickly turned from favorite bands to concerts they had seen. Marcus observed the scene before him with a warm feeling in his heart. He recalls his early days in the industry, when he was young and ambitious about changing the world. Now, he understands that change often comes from the smallest moments: a meal shared, a sincere conversation, a bridge built across rivers of prejudice and misunderstanding. As the sun began to set, the last rays of the day dyed the Boston sky red. The lights in the yard are turned on, creating a warm and intimate space. Wilson integrated himself fully into the group, even engaging in a heated debate about the Red Sox with another colleague. Sarah stood next to Marcus, resting her head on his shoulder. "You were right," she whispered. "Sometimes all we need is a chance to see each other as human beings." Marcus hugged his wife, inhaling the familiar scent of lavender shampoo. In that moment, between the laughter and music, between the scent of food and the warmth of human love, he felt hope. Not the vague kind of hope about a distant future, but hope. Be specific and honest about the changes that are happening right before your eyes, day by day, person by person. 6 months later, on a warm spring morning, Marcus stood in the halls of the Boston Police Academy. The air was filled with the scent of cherry blossoms blooming outside, mixed with the smell of coffee from the paper cups in the hands of the students. He was invited here to speak at the graduation ceremony of a special training course, a program on cultural awareness and social justice in which Wilson participated. From the podium, Marcus could see Wilson sitting in the front row. Next to him was Thomas, Marcus's son. After the barbecue that day, an unexpected friendship blossomed between them, revolving around their common love of music. Wilson even started teaching Thomas how to play bass, and they regularly met for jam sessions on the weekends. "When I started my career," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the silent hall, "I thought justice was a simple thing, black and white, right and wrong. But over time, I realized real justice lies in the gray areas, in the ability to see others as human beings, in the courage to admit one's own mistakes, and in the determination to get better every day." Sunlight penetrates through the hall's stained glass windows, creating colorful patches of light on the floor. Marcus looked down at the crowd, the faces listening attentively. Some men, some women, some white, some of color. All wear police uniforms, but each person has a separate story, a separate journey. "6 months ago," he continued, "an incident happened that made me question the way we administer justice. A young officer stopped my car because of the color of my skin, an act of extraordinary kindness. Comes from unconscious bias that we all have. But instead of letting that incident become a lasting wound, we turned it into an opportunity to learn and grow." Wilson bowed his head slightly, but not out of embarrassment. There was acceptance and understanding in his eyes, about himself, about his past mistakes, and about the road ahead. "Today," Marcus continued, "I don't just see police officers who have completed a course. I see people who have had the courage to face their own prejudices, who have chosen to be a bridge instead of walls, people who understand that the true power of law lies in its ability to protect and serve all people fairly." From the audience, Sarah smiled at her husband. Next to her, a woman was wiping tears from her eyes. Marcus recognized it as the mother of a teenager who had shared her story in the course, a story of fear and mistrust, but also a story of hope and change. "Last week," Marcus said, his voice low, "I got a call from Sergeant Wilson. He stopped a young black man in the evening, but this time, instead of letting fear and dominant, he approached the situation with respect and professionalism. It turned out that the young man was on his way to the hospital. His wife was not just escorting him to the hospital safe, but also wait with him until the baby is born." Applause rang out in the hall. Wilson blushed, but pride could be seen in his eyes. "That's what it means to protect and serve," Marcus said. "It's not about power or control. It's about seeing each other as human beings, about building trust, and about creating a community where everyone feels safe and respected." When the ceremony ended, everyone gathered in the schoolyard under the cherry blossoms. Laughter, photography, and congratulatory hugs create a joyful atmosphere on graduation day. Wilson came to see Marcus, his expression serious. "Mr. Thompson," he said, "I want you to know that night, when you invited me to your home, it changed my life." Marcus smiled, placing his hand on Wilson's shoulder. "It wasn't me who changed your life, David. You changed it. I just opened a door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through." Thomas ran over, holding a piece of paper. "Dad, I just received an email from the music festival organizers. They approved my band and David to perform." Wilson smiled brightly. "Really? That's great. We have to practice a lot." Marcus watched his son and Wilson passionately discuss the song list. filled with a warm feeling. Sarah came to his side, holding her husband's hand. "I know what you're thinking," she said softly. "Sometimes the seeds we sow will sprout in unexpected places." Marcus nodded, squeezing his wife's hand. Above their heads, cherry blossom petals blew in the wind like fragments of memories. Memories of a tense night on Maple Avenue, of a conversation in the office, of a barbecue that opened doors. New. And now, under the clear spring sky, amidst laughter and music, Marcus knows that this is only the beginning. Because real change doesn't come from orders or regulations. It comes from sincere encounters, from lessons shared, from bridges built between people. And perhaps that is the most beautiful definition of justice, not punishment, but understanding. It's not about division, it's about connection.